Now we are all set and ready to define the dynamic aspect of this project, which includes when you click on this Add to Cart button, this item gets added to our shopping cart list. The number in the circle gets updated. When we hover over this cart icon, a drop-down window appears. And after putting some items in our cart, if we close this window and after a few days reopen the same website, we still have these items in our cart. So what we are going to do, we are going to start our dynamic manipulation by defining the logic which makes drop-down window appear and disappear when we hover over this icon. But before doing that, there is one teeny bit of information that we need to include in our HTML file and which is very crucial. And what is that information? Well, when we want to click on any of these buttons, we need to be able to uniquely identify the product, and only that product should be appended to the shopping cart. And if that product is already available in the shopping cart, then instead of duplicating that item in the cart, increase its quantity and update its price. And to make all of these things possible, we need a way to uniquely identify these products. But if we go back to our index.html file, each of these products have exactly the same structure and exactly the same class names. So there is no way to uniquely identify each of these products. So we must figure out a way to uniquely identify these products before proceeding any further. Now, since this unique way of identification has nothing to do with the user of our website, that unique identification will come handy in order to define the logic for our shopping cart. So that means the way we are uniquely identifying the product should not be made visible to the user of this web page or website. So the way to do that is through a concept called data attributes. So data attributes are like meta information which you can attach to any HTML element. They will not be visible to the user, but they will be there. So if you want to provide some extra information about those HTML elements, but you don't want that information to be available to the user, to the end user, so you provide that information through data attributes. So the way to define any data attribute is, for example, you want to define an attribute, let's give it a name XYZ and assign it value 324. So to make this thing a data attribute is that you have to append this name XYZ with data hyphen. So anything which is appended by this data hyphen becomes a data attribute. So this XYZ is now a data attribute because it has been appended with data hyphen part. Now you can use this part with any of the HTML elements. So for example, if you want to define a data attribute for this card item div, you will paste it over here. So now this XYZ is a data attribute and its value is 234. So we want to give a unique identification to each of these card items. So that means I'm going to change the name from XYZ to ID. And since this is the very first item, so let's give it a value 1. We have to do the same for rest of our 8 products. This is product 2, and with the top level card item or the div, we are giving it a data attribute named ID and assigning it value 2. So we have to repeat the process for the rest of the products as well. Okay, that's it. So if you notice, we don't see any visible change as the user of this website. However, now each of these products has a unique identification. This product has ID1, ID2, ID3 and likewise. Now we are all set to start working on our dynamic manipulation. So the first thing that we want to work on is that when we hover over this icon, we want this drop-down window to appear. So let's get to it. So first of all, we need to get a reference to this cart icon. Let's check the name of this icon. Let's target this fa-cart-arrow-down. So we want the drop-down cart window to appear when we hover over this cart icon. Therefore, we have to define an event listener for the mouse over event. Cart icon.add event listener. The event we are interested in is mouse over. Let's define arrow function. So when we hover over the mouse, we want the drop-down window to be made visible. And remember, currently it's invisible because it has a class attached to it with the name hide. So we simply have to remove this class from this class list. But first of all, we need to get a reference to that cart window. So that whole cart window that we want to be made visible has the class name whole cart window. So now within this event listener, we have to check if whole cart window dot class list that contains a class name called hide, then simply remove it. Let's go and see if it works. So let's go and hover over the icon and see the window has appeared. Now the problem is that even when we move out of this window, the window is still present. So we want this window to disappear as soon as we are neither hovering over this icon or we are inside this cart window. And by we means the cursor. So this window should be made visible as long as either the cursor is inside this cart window or it's over this cart icon. So how do we do that? Let's first try to define mouse leave event from the same cart icon such that when the cursor moves away from this cart icon, the window disappears. So this is a partial solution. It's not going to solve the problem completely, but let's define this first and see what kind of problem has been solved and what problem still remains to be resolved. Then we will define the next strategy to tackle. So now we need to define another event listener for the same cart icon. But this time instead of mouse over, let's define mouse leave event. And let's comment this out and simply say whole cart window.classList.add hide. So if we move away from the cart icon, we want this hide class to be added to the whole cart window div. Let's go and check it out. So it's there. Let's move away. Now it's gone. Away. So it's there. Now it's gone. Now let's try to bring this cursor inside this whole cart window. But the thing is, the moment we move away from this icon and we reach inside this window, there is a teeny weeny bit of this red portion which is neither part of this icon nor this window. So when the cursor reaches there, the window already disappears. Because this portion, this red area, which is between this blue border and this window, that is the portion where the mouse leave event triggers and the drop-down window gets invisible. So the thing is this, we want this mouse leave event to get triggered if we are moving away from this cart icon, but we are moving either in the left direction, right direction, or towards the top, not down. So when we are moving the cursor in downward position, we want this mouse leave event listener associated with cart icon not to get triggered. But this isn't how event listeners work. So we have defined the event listener to be triggered once the cursor leaves this cart icon. So it's not differentiating between the directions, whereas we want it to distinguish between the directions and should only get triggered for left, right, or up directions, and it should not get triggered for the downward direction. Because when we are moving the cursor downward, that means we are interested in going inside this drop-down window and interested in exploring this shopping cart further. So how do we do that? Here is the approach. When the mouse leave event listener is triggered, we want that event listener to go to sleep for half a second. So within this half a second, if we were actually interested in moving over to our window, the cursor would have already moved into that window. And after that half a second, if you are not interested in going inside this window, then the cursor would have moved over somewhere else. So when the mouse event listener is triggered, then it goes to sleep for half a second. After half a second, it's going to check whether the cursor is already inside the window. If that is the case, then keep the window visible. If it's not the case, then hide the window. So we need some kind of way which informs this event listener, mouse leave event listener, after it wakes up after half a second, to check the state of this whole cart window. Therefore, we are going back to our JavaScript. And since this is the whole cart window, we have to somehow attach a state with this one. So what we are going to do is that to attach a state with this one, we are going to define an attribute for this object. Let's give it a name in window. And initial value is 0. So that means the cursor is not hovering over this window. So this is a state which we have attached with this whole cart window. by defining an attribute and assigning it a value 0. Before we go and make changes in the mouse leave event listener, let's define the mouse over and mouse leave event listeners for whole cart window as well. And in the arrow function over here, so when the cursor is hovering over this whole cart window, we want to change this state from 0 to 1. So let's make it this dot in window equals 1. So now the state has been set to 1. So that means our cursor is inside the whole cart window, the drop down window. Now let's go back to the cart icon and let's make changes. So once this mouse leave event listener is triggered on the cart, then we want it to sleep for 30 seconds, half a second. This set timeout method takes two parameters. The first one is going to be the function which is going to be executed after timeout happens. The second one specifies the time after which the timeout event should get triggered. The first one is going to be a method and the second one is going to be the time. So we are defining the method later. Let's define the second parameter. So 1000 milliseconds means 1 second. So let's put 500. That means 500 milliseconds means half a second. Now over here we have to define the function which is going to be executed once this timeout occurs. When within this function we have to define all the logic. So let's define another arrow function over here. So the first thing after waking up that needs to be done is check the status of this whole cart window. So if whole cart window dot in window equals 1, that means the cursor has already moved within this whole cart window. In that case, do nothing. Let's change it to 0. So if this in window is still 0, in that case, hide the whole cart window. However, if the status is not 0, that means it's 1. So that means our cursor has already moved to whole cart window. In that case, there is no need to hide it and keep it visible. So now let's go and check if it works. Okay, now our cursor is over the icon. Now let's try to go up and hopefully the window will be made invisible. It took a slight delay before hiding the window. That was the half a second delay for which the mouse leave event was put to sleep. So after half a second, it checked the status of whole cart windows, which is defined with the attribute name in window. And since it was still 0, the window got invisible again. So now let's try to move towards the left and window disappeared. Now let's try to move towards the right and window disappears. Now let's try to move downwards and hopefully this time window will not disappear. Oh, it still disappears. So let's go and see what are we doing wrong. Let's change it to whole cart window. So it works now. But now the problem is that now when we move away from this window is still visible. So now we have to define the mouse leave event listener for this whole cart window, which makes this window disappear. So copy and paste. Let's define mouse leave event listener and copy, paste, and again reset the status variable or status attribute from 1 to 0 because we are again setting it to invisible. Now let's go and have a look. Good. Okay, that's working. So this is the reason for which I had kept this border, this blue border, to make you understand about this portion of the space and the problem that this was causing and how to resolve it. Now since we have resolved it, let's go to our CSS file and remove this border. Now we are going to work on this add to cart button such that when we click on this add to cart button, this item should get appended to our drop down window. But since we want our shopping cart to be a persistent shopping cart, so instead of adding it to the shopping cart directly, we are going to store it in our local storage. and from local storage, whatever is available there, it's going to be displayed in the shopping cart. So let's go and know about local storage first and then figure out how to tackle this issue. So we are going to our demo project and see how does the local storage associated with our demo project works. Then we have to try to replicate the same structure over here. So this is our demo project and currently it has one product in it. So let's go to the developers tool. Let's go to applications. Here it says local storage, session storage, and cookies and other things. So we are interested in local storage. Let's click on this one. And this is the name of the website. So currently our website is 127.0.0.1 and the port number. That's it. So this is the port number. So if there is any local storage associated with this website, then it's going to be displayed over here. So the local storage associated with this website has some values associated with it. The way a local storage works is that it consists of key value pairs. So this left side cart items is the key, and this whole thing that you can see, which is in the form of text over here, is actually its value. So a local storage always stores its value in the form of a string. But if you pay a closer attention, actually it's an object which has been converted into a string. So this object is more understandable over here. So this is the object and it has one attribute with the name 2. So 2 over here is the name of the attribute of this object. And the value of this attribute is actually another object which contains 3 attributes or 3 fields. Name, its value is item. Image, its value is the URL where the image is present. And the third attribute is price and its value is 56.78. Fourth attribute is quantity and it's 1. So that means the way we are storing attributes in our local storage is that we are creating an object and all the attributes within that object have names with numeric values 2, 1, 4 or something, and the values of those fields is another object with different fields: name, image, price and quantity. Let's try to add one more item to our shopping cart. Let me close this and add one more item. So now we have 2 items. Now let's go and check local storage again. Again, our cart items, the key name is cart item. Its value is an object which consists of 2 fields. The name of first field is 2 and the name of second field is 3. The field name 2 has a value which is another object, and the field name 3 also has a value which is another object. So where are these 2 and 3 coming from? These 2 and 3 are unique IDs which are associated with the products that we have put in our cart. Remember the data attribute that we attach with each product. The reason for putting it there is that those are unique. Each product has a unique ID. So within this top level object that we are storing with the cart items key, we are creating field names out of those IDs. Because IDs are unique, this way we are able to uniquely identify which product is present in our shopping cart. And each of these fields in turn is an object because we need to associate different pieces of information about the product so that we can appropriately display it in our cart. Specifically, we are interested in name, image, price and quantity. So when we click on this add to cart button, an object is created with the name, image, price and quantity fields, and that object is appended to another object with the field name which is the same as the ID of this product, and then that object, which consists of collection of these objects, is added to this cart item as its value, and then these cart items and its value are stored in the local storage. And our shopping cart will somehow be triggered every time a change is made to our local storage, and then shopping cart will check the local storage, whatever is available over here. From there it's going to recreate the shopping cart window and repopulate it with all the contents which are currently in our local storage. So when a new item is added to the local storage, somehow the shopping cart needs to be notified. It will come to this local storage and rebuild itself out of the current information present there. Likewise, when an item is deleted, or let's say the quantity is updated, again the shopping cart needs to be notified, and then shopping cart will rebuild itself from the current information available in the local storage. So this local storage is a kind of storage which is by default provided by all the browsers, and the data you store over here in the local storage remains there forever unless you explicitly delete this data. To manipulate this local storage, we have an API by default available by the browser as well. So to store something in the local storage, we have a method called setItem, and you provide 2 arguments to it, key and value. Then setItem will store that key value pair over here. If you want to access certain key value pair from your local storage, you will use getItem method. If you want to remove certain key value pair from the local storage, you will use the remove method. So these methods are again by default provided by the browser. We are simply going to use them. Okay, so now let's get to it. Now before we define any logic for add to cart button, let's create certain classes that we are going to use for this project. First of all, we need to define a class which is going to create objects, these ones. So every time you click on add to cart button, an object with these fields is created. So let's give it a class name cart item, and let's define a constructor. We need to provide name, image, and price. This dot name is name. This dot image is image. This dot price is price. Then we have to set this dot quantity equals 1 by default. So we don't need the value for the quantity to be passed as an argument to this constructor, because when the object is created, the quantity is always set to 1 by default. So this constructor requires 3 parameters: name, image, and price. This class doesn't require any methods for manipulation. So that's the end of this definition. Now we need to define another class which is going to interact and update our local storage. And since there is going to be one local storage key value pair which is going to be associated with our project, therefore we can make this class static by defining all its methods as static methods. Object of this cart item need to be created whenever add to cart button is clicked and that product is not already in the local storage. Therefore we have to define a constructor for this one. For the second class, we don't need to define any constructor. Everything is going to be static there. Let's call it local cart. So this local cart represents all the elements which are supposed to be in our shopping cart, but currently they are in the local storage. Let's define the key name with which we want to store everything in our local storage. Let's give it a name key, and let's give it name cart items. So cart items is the value of this key. Now let's define all the methods that we are going to use. So we are going to have a method get local cart items. So items in the local storage. Let's keep its body empty for the time being. We need another method add item to local cart. Now this get local cart items is going to simply return all the items currently present in the local cart, so therefore it doesn't require any parameter. However, when we are adding something to the local cart, that means we are going to provide an object of this cart item as a parameter to this method. And since they are going to be stored, let's go to the demo. So this is the object that we need to provide as a parameter, but we also need to provide its unique identification as well, because the top level object within which all of these objects are going to be appended as a field. So that top level object is going to use the ID as the field name for this new item or new object which is going to be added to the top level object. So ID and item. Let's keep the body empty for the time being. Let's define the third static method. Remove item from cart. And this time, since we are going to remove a specific item from the cart, and the way to uniquely identify an item is its ID, so we are just passing the ID, then this remove item from cart method should remove that item whose field name matches the ID provided. So if the ID provided is 2, then this field is removed. If the ID provided is 3, then this whole field and its associated object is removed. These are the 3 methods that we need to define in order to store items in our local cart. Now before defining the bodies of these methods, let's try to figure out what kind of data structure can we utilize such that when we convert it into a string by using json.stringify, it gives us this structure. This structure. A kind of key value pair where this ID or the key is unique and value is an object. So we might have the same object as values for different keys, but we shall never have repetition of these numbers or these IDs. So we have to think of a data structure which makes sure these IDs remain unique, however its values can be not unique. So the only data structure in JavaScript that makes it possible is a map. Map is a key value pair like local storage where all the keys are unique. But a map can have multiple key value pairs. Each of these keys is unique. So there is no way to have a duplicate key. Therefore, if we click on this add to cart button and this is the first time that the item is being added to the map, this will get added to the map with its unique key. Second time, if you try to click on this add to cart button, because of the ID or the key being same, the previous value will be overwritten rather than duplicating it in the map. So that means when add to cart button is clicked, that item is going to be stored in the map, and at the end, whatever is the status of the map, it's going to be converted into a string and stored in the local storage. So let's get to it. So let's start with the local cart items. So within this method, we are trying to get whatever is present in the local storage, and we know the key that we have used to store the data in the local storage is cart items. So let's define a constant with the name cart and now use local storage dot get item, and this get item needs a key whose value we want to be accessed from the local storage, and the name is going to come from this key static variable. So if there is any key in the local storage matching this cart item's name, the data or the value associated with that key is going to be returned and stored in this cart constant. Now we have to make sure this cart item is not null, or the content of this cart item is actually not an empty string. So if cart equals null means currently no key has been added in the local storage with this name or this key name. If it's null, or cart.length equals 0, because we know that the value of a key in local storage is always a string, so we can check the length of that key. If that is equal to 0, means even though the key is present, the value associated with it is an empty string. So in that case, we basically want to return an empty map, so a map with no values, because this function is supposed to return a map. So if there is no key matching this thing, or if it is present but the length of its value is 0, in that case we have to return an empty map. So let's create a map first. Let cart map new map. This is an empty map. Now simply return this cart map which is currently empty. If that is not the case, then we will proceed further in this method. The first thing that we need to do is that we have to parse this cart, which is a stringified object, back into a JavaScript object. So to do that, we are going to say JSON parse and pass in the cart constant. Now parsing this cart with the JSON.parse method is going to return us an object. The fields of that object is going to be IDs, and the values associated with those IDs are going to be objects in themselves. Now we have to convert this object into a map with each of its fields converted into different entries in the map. So the field names are IDs and their values are objects. So each field name and associate object will convert into one map entry. But if we try to pass this whole thing and convert into new map, this won't work. So somehow we need to convert this object which is returned after parsing it into an array of arrays, something like this. So we have to convert that object into an array, and each field and associate value becomes another array inside it. So if there are 3 fields, like currently there are 2 fields with the field names 2 and 3 and their associate values, they will become an array of arrays like this. 2 and its associate object, and the 3 and its associate object. If somehow we convert this object into this form, an array of arrays, then we can pass this an array of array to this new map as a constructor, and out of this array of arrays a map will get created. So let's cut this and use object with capital O dot entries and pass this whole thing back. So what is happening over here is that this card contains this whole thing in the string form. So passing it to JSON.parse converts into a JavaScript object. So JavaScript object is then passed to object.entries method, and this object.entries method is going to convert each field and associate value into an array of arrays. So since currently over here there are two fields in this object, so we are going to have an array, two elements in it, and each of these elements are going to be arrays themselves. So this is first element with the id 2, and this is its value, and this one is going to be second array element, which is again an array with id 3 and associate object. Now once the data is in the form of array of arrays, now you can pass this as a constructor to this map method, and it will create a map from this array of arrays, and we simply have to return this new map, and that is it. We are done. So let me remove this. Now let's work on the add items to local cart. Now this has been passed in two arguments, id and item. So what we'll do, we will call this method add local cart items. This will return us all the objects in the local storage in the form of map. Then we will go through all the entries in the map one by one and look for any entry which has a matching key with this one, this id. So if there is any key which matches this id, that means we already have this item in our cart. So instead of duplicating it, update its quantity and price. However, if no matching key is found, that means this is the first time we have added the item to the cart. So simply create a new entry in the map with the key matching this id and the value matching this item. So let's first extract everything which is currently present in the local cart storage by calling this method get local cart items .get local cart items. So whatever is present in the local storage, store it in this cart variable. Now we have to check if cart, because we know this cart is a map that has been returned. So if cart.has, we can check for the key which matches this id. So if there is an entry in the map whose key matches this id, in that case get the item associated with the key. So the value associated with this key, get that value and store it in this item variable. Let's change its name because we have the same name over here. Make it map item. Now map item dot quantity, whatever its quantity is, add one more to it. Now we have to put this updated map item back into the map. So we are going to use cart.set. This set method on the map takes two parameters. The first one is going to be the id, and the second one is going to be the value that you want to be associated with this id. So first we check if this cart has a key which matches this id. If that is the case, then extract the item associated with that key, update its quantity, and then put it back into the map again. However, if that is not the case, in that case simply put id and item that you received into the map. Now so far we have only updated the map. Now we have to somehow convert this map back into a string and store it as an updated value of local storage. So now we have to apply the reverse process that we applied over here. So we have a map. First of all, we have to convert this map into an array of arrays where each element in the array is another array, and that array consists of only two items, the id and the item. And to that array of arrays, we are going to call json.stringify, which is going to convert this as a stringified version of JSON object. So the first thing is, let's convert this map into an array of arrays. And to convert this map into an array of arrays, we are again going to call object with capital O. This time we have to call another method from entries, pass this map, and then we have to pass this whole thing to json.stringify. Okay, now let's cut this and call localStorage.set item. The first one is going to be the key, which is present in the key static variable, and paste back everything that we just cut. Now from this map, we are going to get an array of arrays by applying object.fromEntries method, and that array of arrays we are passing it to json.stringify, which is going to convert this into an stringified JSON object, and then it's going to be stored with this key in the local storage. Now the local storage has been updated. Now every time the local storage gets updated, we want our drop-down cart window to be updated as well. So for that, we are going to call update cart UI. So this is another method. This method, when called, is going to actually reflect all the changes that are made to our local storage into our drop-down cart window as well, for the user to actually see them. But this function is not defined yet. We will define this function eventually, but it should be called over here where we are updating our local storage. And it's also going to be called in our remove item from the cart as well, because we are again updating our local storage by removing an item from the cart. So let's define the logic for this remove item from the cart. So again, let's call local cart.get local cart items. Now check if cart.has a key with the matching ID. If that is the case, then get the item associated with this ID and check its quantity. If quantity is greater than 1, if map item.quantity, in that case map item.quantity -1. Whatever is the quantity of this map item, decrease it by 1 and set it back in the map. These two should be placed inside this. These two statements are associated with this if statement. If map.quantity is greater than 1. If the quantity is not greater than 1, that means it's equal to 1. In that case, remove the whole key value pair from the map. Else cart.delete ID. Now after removing this key value pair from the map, there is a possibility that this was the very last item in the map. So currently our map is actually an empty map. So if that is the case, we want the whole entry from local storage to be completely removed as well. We don't want a key in our local storage with empty string. So we have to check if cart.length, if it's equal to 0, in that case local storage.clear. So completely delete the entry from the local storage. If that is not the case, in that case, after deleting an entry from the map or decreasing the quantity, the local storage need to be reflected that change as well. So convert this map into a string and update the local storage key with this new map's value. So copy this part and paste both these lines and paste. So again, we are converting this cart map into an array of arrays, and on that we are applying json.stringify, which is going to convert this an array of array into a stringified JSON object. Then we are going to store that stringified JSON object into our local storage with this key. And finally, we are again updating the drop-down cart window as well by calling the update cart UI method. And that's the end of our remove item from cart method as well. Next, we need to work on the add to cart button, such that when we click on these buttons, an event should get triggered which tries to add this item to the cart. I mean, first to the local storage and from there to this drop-down cart window. So let's go and define that event listener for all of these buttons. So remember that all of these buttons share the same class name. Okay, over here, add to cart buttons, document.query selector all, because we have more than one elements with the same class name. Therefore, we have to use query selector all, and the class name is add to cart button. Now this is going to return us a collection which is stored over here in add to cart buttons. Now we are going to iterate through all of these elements in the collection one by one and keep on attaching the click event listener. So we are going to take each element of this collection one at a time and pass it to this for each, which takes another function as a parameter. So each of these buttons is going to be one by one passed as a parameter to that function. So that function is an arrow function, and let's give that one. The button that is passed one at a time, we are referencing it with the name btn. Now let's define the actual event listener. We want to attach an event listener to this button. Add event listener, and the event is click. And over here we can define an arrow function, which we have been doing, but since it's already nested inside another for each, so I'm going to just mention the name of the function and I'll define this function outside this for each block. Add item function. So over here what we are doing is that we are taking one button at a time from this collection and passing this to this arrow function, which is inside this for each, and within that arrow function, the button that has been passed, we are attaching click event listener, and the function that should be executed once the button is clicked is called add item function. So let's define this add item function. I forgot to put word function over here. Within this add item function, we are supposed to create an object of type cart item and pass all the information that is present over here except for this add to cart button to our cart item. The image, title, lorem ipsum text, price. The quantity is by default set to 1 by our cart item. So that reminds me, I actually haven't defined any field for our description, the details part. So let's go and add this field to our cart item. Then in order to access these fields through JavaScript relatively easy, we basically have to put this lorem ipsum text in another span. This is going to make it easier to access these individual fields, the details, price and the title, relatively easy. Because otherwise this price and add to cart and this description, they are all inside a paragraph. So we need to be able to separately target them. Therefore, we have to put this description inside its own span as well. But first, let's go and create another field in our cart item class. So this is cart item, and let's pass description parameter and set this dot description equals description. Now let's go to index.html, and for our 9 items, this lorem ipsum text, we have to put it another span, and we have to do this for all the products. Test. So within the details section of each product, we have a paragraph, and this paragraph consists of 3 spans. The first one contains the detailed description of the item, the second one contains the price, and the third one contains the add to cart button. Now let's go to JavaScript file and let's go and work on the event listener function associated with each of these add to cart buttons. Add item function. Let's define the logic for this. So within this function, we need to have access to that event object which was triggered. Therefore, let's pass in the event which got triggered when this button was clicked. Now before we do any manipulation, let's try to figure out what do we get if we say e.target. So let's click on this second element, F12, and we've got the span which was clicked. So this span add to cart button has been returned. Now the first information that we need to store in our cart item object is this ID. So somehow from here we have to get over here. So using reference to this span, we are going to target its parent. So the parent of this span is this paragraph, and the parent of this paragraph is this div, and the parent of this div is this top level div, which has this data attribute ID attached to it. We are interested in getting that ID. So const ID is e.target dot parent element. This will give us paragraph, then dot parent element, this will give us the details div, and another parent div will give us the top level div, and we are interested in the data attribute. So get attribute method, and the attribute that we are interested in is data-id. Now let's console log this id and confirm that we have got access to that id, whichever product has been clicked. Okay, let's click on this one and we got id 1, this one id 2. We've somewhere we haven't changed the image, so image 2 and 4 are the same. Let's click on image 3 and we got id 3, image product 4 and we got id 4. So we are able to get the id. Now applying the same process, we have to get the URL of the image, the title, details and price. Quantity is already in our cart item. So after id, we need to get the image. So let's see, where do we have image in our structure. So starting from here, we have to go to its parent, that is paragraph. From there we have to go to its parent, that is the details div, and then this image is actually the sibling of this details div. So we need to use two parent elements, then siblings. So e.target, then parent element will give us paragraph, and this parent element will give us the details div, and the actually image is the sibling of this previous sibling of this details div. So over here, from here, let's remove this part. So use previous element sibling, and this will return us an image. We are only interested in its source. Let's write source this time. Sorry, not the source, it's image. We are storing the source in the image. Now let's see if we have actually captured the URL in this constant. So click. So we are able to get the URL. Next we need to get the name of the product. So this is where we have name. So starting from here, we will access its first parent element, and the name is the previous sibling of this parent element. So e.target.parent element, copy, then previous element sibling. This will return us the h3. Now we are interested in its text content. Let's check if we have this name, item name. Good. Now let's access this description. So over here, from here, we will target its parent element, and this description is the first child of parent element. So const description is e.target.parent element, paste, then its first child is the description, so children at index 0, and its text content. e.target.parent element, D is missing. So we've got the lorem ipsum text. Now let's access this price. So the price is the second child of this P. Copy, paste, change the name to price. So it's a second child, and text contents. Click. So we've got the price. We need to remove this first part, price, colon, space and dollar, because we can't add the prices together if we have text plus numbers in it. So price is price.replace. Now I'm using very basic regular expression because our program is already way too long. Sorry. Obviously this isn't going to work if, let's say, some prices don't have this space present, or this key is, or this P is small case, is in small case. It will only work if we have this capital P, RICE, colon, then space and then $sign. So only that part is going to be replaced from the, so replace it with nothing. Okay, now we have got all the pieces of information. Now we are ready to create an object of type cart item. So const item equals new cart item. Let's see the sequence in the constructor. First name, description, then image and price. Name, description, image and price. Now the object is created. Now we have to store this object in our local storage. So we are going to call local cart.add item to local cart. We have to pass in ID and then the item, the object itself, and that's it. We are done with adding the item to the local storage. Let's go and see if it actually works. So before we do anything, let's check the status of our local storage at the moment. So if you notice, this is the URL of our website, local IP address, then port number is 5501. Our demo is running on port 5500, whereas our current project is running on port 5501. So this is a completely different website, and since we haven't yet stored anything in our local storage, therefore local storage for this website is completely empty. Now click on one of the add to cart buttons and see what happens. Hopefully we will get one entry in our local storage for this website over here. Nothing happened. We've got an error. The reference to this key is undefined. So key is our constant property in the local cart class, and actually wherever we are using this key, we are supposed to append this with the class name, which I forgot to do. So let me copy paste wherever the word key appears in my class. Okay, now let's give it another try. Add to cart. Update cart UI is not defined. Obviously we have not defined this function yet, so we are bound to get this error, but that's not an issue at the moment. Let's go and check out the local storage. Okay, now we have an entry in our local storage with the key cart items, and its value is this, an object which is actually consists of a field named 5, and its value is this object. The name, description, price and quantity, and image. So all the fields are there. So now we are able to add the object to our local storage. When we click on this add to cart button, now we have to go and define the update, what was the function name? Update cart UI, such that our shopping cart is updated as well. This one. So these two items in our cart are statically defined. So now we have to go and delete these statically defined items, and whatever is available in the local storage, grab those items and display them over here. So let's go and define the update cart UI function. Before I write any code over here, let me take you back to the structure of this whole cart window, and let me show you where we are going to make changes. So this is the div cart wrapper, and inside this div we have individual items, cart item. We will start off by deleting whatever we have in the cart wrapper and setting its content to empty string. This way cart wrapper section of the drop down window will become empty. Then dynamically we will create divs with this structure, and then we will append this div to this cart wrapper div. And once we have appended all the items in our cart wrapper, we will update the subtotal as well. So let's get to it. We need reference to our cart wrapper. So const since we don't need this cart wrapper anywhere else except for this update cart UI, so we are defining this reference as a local variable to this function. Now set this content to empty string by setting its inner HTML to empty string. Now we need to fetch all the items from our local storage. So we are going to use local cart.get local cart items, and over here we have to provide the name of the key whose value we want to fetch in, and its cart items. And since this is going to return as a map, so let's store it in a variable. this get local cart items static method has been passed in a key. This method will go and check the local storage, and if there is a matching key there, it will bring in the value associated with this key and stores it in this items constant. And we know that this get local cart items return us a map. So this map could be empty. Therefore, first of all, we have to check if this items map is empty or not. If items equals null, then don't do anything, simply return. That means there is nothing in our local storage, so our shopping cart is supposed to stay empty. But if that is not the case, then this if will never execute and we can continue. So first of all, let's create two variables. This count variable is going to count all the items in the map, and let total give it initial value of 0. In this total variable, we are going to keep on adding the prices of all the items in our local storage. Then we will update our subtotal with this total variable's value. Now we are all set to iterate over map, create a div for each entry in the map, and keep on appending those divs to the cart wrapper div. We are going to use for loop, and since a map returns us a key value pair, so we are going to use two variables, and now we have to get one entry at a time from the map. So therefore we are going to use items.entries method. So this entries method on a map returns us one key value pair at a time. Now using this key which represents the ID and this value which represents the whole object stored in the local storage, we are going to create a div, and since this div is going to represent a cart item, so let me give it a name cart item as well. Document.create element div. Now give it a class name. Cart item. Giving it a class name is important because only that's how the styling that we have defined for our cart is going to be applied to this cart item. Without this class name, no styling will be applied. So we have to make sure that we do assign the class name as well. Now we have to set its inner HTML. We are going to use backtick because we are going to use text as well as variables for this inner HTML, so we have to use backtick. Otherwise we can't use variables inside a string. And the best way to define this inner HTML is to go back to index.html, and since this is the cart item div, and so everything in between, I'm going to copy it and paste it over here. Now for this name h3, we are going to use a string interpolation value.name, because this value is an object and it contains all these fields. For this description, again replace it with value.disk. For the quantity, again value.quantity, and for the price, basically we have to check the quantity. If the quantity is more than 1, then we have to multiply the current value of price by the quantity. Something like that. Value.price times value.quantity. But within these curly brackets, we can only use variable names. We cannot perform any type of computation. So we have to take this out somewhere above this backtick, do this calculation and put the value over there. So let's create a new variable, price, Control X, paste it over here, and then we can place this price variable, which is a local variable, over here. And while we are calculating the price of individual items, why not update our total price and the count as well? So as we are iterating, let's add one more to the count, and let's update the total as well. So current value of total plus the price that we just calculated. Okay, now let's go back. Okay, that's it. This will give us the whole contents of this div. cart item div. Now if you remember that this last element of this cart item div is cancel button, but since we are dynamically creating this button, so that means this button does not have any event listener attached. Therefore if we click on that button, nothing will happen. So we have to make sure that we are attaching an event listener to this last button as well. So to do that, we have to somehow get a reference to this last button and then attach an event listener to this. So the way we are going to get access to this last element is that we are going to target the last element of this cart item dot last element child, which is going to return us this div, and then to this div we are attaching an event listener which is click. Let's define arrow function, and we simply have to call local cart dot remove item from the cart method, and we have to pass in the ID. So the ID is in this key constant over here. So we are going to pass this key. Now we have attached the event listener and we are ready to attach this whole div. Remember, so far we have only created this div and defined its inner HTML. Now we have to attach this div to the cart wrapper class, this one. Cart item. Now this bracket is the end of our loop. So outside this for loop, now we are going to check the count variable. So if count is greater than 1, that means we have some items in our local storage. In that case, we have to append the non-empty class to our cart icon so that the circle becomes visible. If that is not the case, we have to make sure that this class, which we have named non-empty, is not attached to the cart item. So cart icon dot class list dot add non-empty, else we have to make sure that this class is not part of this cart icon. Remove, and we have to go to index.html and let's remove this class non-empty because we put it statically there. Now this class is going to be inserted and removed dynamically through JavaScript depending on if we have any items in our cart. The next thing that we need to do is that we want the number that appears in the circle to be dynamically updated to represent the number of items in the cart. To do that, we again have to go back to our if portion and we have to get a reference to the root section in our CSS file. So in our CSS file, we define this part root where we have one variable. So we are going to get a reference to this one, and then through this one we will update the contents of this after content variable, and whatever the value we give to this variable, it's going to be updated. It's going to be replaced over here, and as a result we will see that value inside the circle. Now root dot style dot set property. What's wrong? And here we have to give it two parameters. The first one is going to be the property name in the CSS, and second one is going to be its value. So let's define the property we are interested in, which is after content. That's the variable name that we have assigned in our CSS file, and now its value, and its value is supposed to be within the quotations. So we are going to use string interpolation again. So backtick, double quotations, and within those double quotations we are using string interpolation, and the number is going to come from the count. So whatever is the count, represent that count inside the circle. We want to update the subtotal as well. So first of all, gets a reference to it. subtotal.inner.html is, again we are using backtick. So this $sign is for the price, and this second $sign is the part of string interpolation syntax. Now over here we have to put the total. I think that's it. The only thing left to do is that let's comment out these two cart items that we have statically put in the cart wrapper, our shopping cart. Okay, and just to be on the safe side, we want this update cart function to be executed when the DOM contents are loaded into the memory. That means when we type in the URL and the web page first loads into the browser. So we have to target DOM content loaded event and update cart UI. Okay, I think we have done everything we were supposed to do. So let's go and test it out in the browser. Let's see. Okay, I can see two problems over here. First of all, it's showing some item in the cart, but its image is not visible. And second, if there are items in the cart, so we should be able to see a circle over here with number 1 in it. So let's solve this image problem first. For the source part, value.image. Let's add one more item and see if add to cart item works. Okay, that's working. And let's click on the same product again and see if the quantity is updating and the price is updating as well. Okay, the quantity has been updated. Likewise, the price is updated. However, we need to round off our subtotal. But first we need to figure out why were we not able to see that circle when we had just one item. Let me remove it. So again, this circle is missing. Oh, I know. The logic that we have defined for making the circle appear or disappear is if the count is greater than 1. So that's why when the count is 1, that circle is not being made visible. So we need to make sure if the count is greater than 0. So let's go. If the count is greater than 0, now we can see it. Let's remove it. We got another problem. The width of the shopping cart decreased. So even putting the important attribute with the width doesn't seem to be working anymore. So let's go back to our CSS and let's go to cart wrapper class. Let's give it a width type. It was 26%, I think. Now that issue is resolved. Let's click and append an element. Okay, 1. Increasing the quantity updates the total price and the subtotal, and the number is still 1. Let's add another product. The number got updated. Let's remove it, remove. Everything is working fine. The only thing we need to now tweak a bit is that we have to somehow round the total so that we are not able to see such a long number after the decimal point where we are calculating our total. We should do this rounding for the price as well as for the total, because the price is also being multiplied with the quantity. So there is a possibility that for the individual prices of the products, we again might encounter the same situation where we have a very long number after decimal point. So to do that, we are going to assign math.round. First of all, let's multiply price with 100, round it off, and then divide it by 100 again. So multiplying price by 100 will move the decimal point 2 places to the right, and then it will round it to the nearest integer. And after rounding it off, we will again move the decimal point 2 places to the left. So this way we will always end up with a number which has only 2 digits after the decimal point. So we are doing this for price. We have to do this for the total as well. So let me copy this and replace price with total. Let's test it out. Let's add this item. Okay, one more time. Good, it's working. Okay, so it's working. One more time. It's working. Okay. And with this, we have achieved our goal for this tutorial. We designed a drop-down cart window from the beginning, and we learned how to use local storage. Not only just how to use it, local storage, but we also learned how to use complex data structures in it. We also saw a practical application of map data structure. This helped us avoid putting duplicate product entries in the shopping cart. We also learned how to put the circle along with the number over our shopping cart and make it appear and disappear and update according to the status of our shopping cart, and many other things. I hope you liked this tutorial, and if you did, please don't forget to like, subscribe, share and comment. Thank you so much.